This conference will now be recorded.
All right, folks, so just showing you all here on campus and online. This is a portion of the model that we have for the sarcomere, and we're seeing here that the actin, the thin myofilaments, these are what are represented by the model, and also here online. And these are what slide upon the myosin, the thick myofilaments. Now you'll see here that I'm going to pass this around into the room on both sides. Just be very careful with it, please. It's like one of them that's a little loose. You'll see the green dots and you'll see the yellow lines. Pass it around the whole classroom here. The green dots and the yellow lines. So they represent the structures here that are going to cover the actin so that you can't continually have just muscle contractions. How helpful would it be if your muscles were constantly in a state of contraction? That would make no sense. That would not be helpful at all, right? There are pathology and pathological conditions that occur, in particular something called tetanus that we'll talk about a little bit later, where there's contracture of musculature and it's not a healthy or a good thing. So there needs to be relaxation and contraction. So on the PowerPoint here in blue, the little blue, these balls right here that you're seeing, and the green line that you're seeing. So the green line is called tropomyosin. That tropomyosin is going to cover the sites on actin for myosin to connect to in order to create a muscle contraction. So we all are on the same page, remembering that for there to be a contraction to occur, these heads right here, see the in red, the myosin, that needs to actually touch the actin. Remember I said to you that the isometric contraction is when we have tightening of the musculature, but we don't have shortening of the muscles. So there's no sliding, but we have these myosin heads touching the actin, right? That's an isometric contraction. So you could do a crunch without really doing a crunch. You can contract your rectus abdominal muscles, make them tight and not actually do a full crunch, right? You can still make them tight. That's an isometric contraction. Isotonic contraction is when you have what you're thinking of a contraction where actually the muscles are shortening and getting smaller as a result of a contraction. That's when we have not only just the myosin head is touching the actin, but it's actually then sliding the actin upon the myosin. Okay? So that tropomyosin, that yellow line in our model, is preventing myosin from touching the actin and creating a contraction. That's a big deal. Where's the other part of the model? Good. So, well, what's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. These little blue right here that is on the green, that's called troponin. So troponin, and those of you that are seeing here, troponin, these little structures right here, connected to the green right there, troponin will interact with calcium. And when it does that, it's going to then change shape, moving that green line, that tropomyosin, out of the way, allowing for myosin to connect with actin and create a muscle contraction. If there's no calcium present, the troponin will not change shape and myosin will not be able to connect with actin. So contraction will not occur. So do you see how important at a second time we can see that calcium is important for muscle contraction to occur? At the very beginning, at the neuromuscular junction, at that nerve muscle junction, calcium's important, and calcium's also important here to interact with the troponin so that it can change shape and move the tropomyosin out of the way, allowing for myosin and actin to touch, create a contraction, and then for there to be sliding, for there to be movement in order to create that isotonic contraction. So here, I'm just going to go back 2 slides for a moment and just show you that. So here we have those two terms, troponin, tropomyosin, calcium. If you just remember those three terms from this image right here, you'll have an understanding that calcium is important for muscle contraction to occur. Without it, folks, you're not going to have muscle contraction, and that's going to be a problem. How about if it's something that's going to control? Look over here, folks. So look over at our model, and imagine if there's issues with this muscle right here, your diaphragm. There's issues with the diaphragm and other musculature within the ribs that allow for an aid in your ability to breathe. Is that going to be a problem? That's absolutely going to be a problem. So you want to make sure that you have enough calcium. And it's not, again, like I said, just calcium in your diet. We have calcium in the skeletal system that is there that we can use it when the body needs it. So very important. And here it's just showing you an image of that neuromuscular junction. And remember, calcium is also important here for there to be this release of that nerve chemical. Remember I talked to you about that nerve chemical. It's called acetylcholine. Very similar in that it's a nerve chemical like, or we would say a neurotransmitter, like dopamine, serotonin, dopamine for the pleasure reactions of the body that we will so involved in addiction and such. Serotonin, we're thinking of like different types of mental health issues, as well as like depression and such. Those are neurotransmitters. Acetylcholine, that blue dot right there, neurotransmitter. Very important. With this not moving, you're not going to get any type of action on the muscular side of things. Remember I said to you that last class I talked to you about the fact that if you have an issue with a neurotoxin, say from a spider, say from a snake, or from some type of reptile or lizard, that neurotoxin can prevent something from taking place, from actual neurotransmitters from interacting with specific channels that would allow them for, they would block those channels, and this would be a problem. This can prevent muscle contraction from occurring. Not a good thing. We're going to talk a little bit about anatomy, the anatomy regarding the nervous system side. Okay? You'll see here neuron signals muscle cells at the neuromuscular junction, right? That nerve muscle junction. Do you recall that I said to you that at that nerve muscle junction, is the nerve ever touching the muscle? Not. There's a space. Remember, look back here for a moment. Is there a space there? Those of you online? It's not touching, is it? There's a space here. So we would call this a chemical synapse. Write that down, please. It's a chemical synapse. That chemical is the acetylcholine, ACH. So the term synapse has to do with communication, right? That synaptic cleft, that's the proper term, right? It's a gap between the muscle and the neuron ending, right? The axon is what's actually reaching out to the muscle, okay? When you think of nerves and such, you're thinking of axons, extensions of the neuron. That neurotransmitter, that chemical messenger, that's the acetylcholine. Also, we can abbreviate it by doing ACH. See right there, ACH. So that needs to travel to the muscle to allow for the whole process of contraction to occur. Now you'll see here that ways muscle gets cells can get energy. So this term right here is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Do you recall I said to you that when the person dies, they can experience something called rigor mortis, right? The body gets stiff. The musculature can get kind of rigid and stiff. This is after the body has, the person has passed away, and yet there's still this stiffening of the musculature for a short period of time. It can really go up until, 70 some odd hours, really, but depending. right? Depending upon the patient. So here's the deal. Why is that occurring? Why is that happening? Because the body is dead, so it's no longer producing ATP. ATP is necessary for the release of myosin from touching actin, right? Contraction, myosin touches actin. Thick filament, thin myofilament, they connect. That creates contraction. ATP is necessary in order for there to be a release from those two myofilaments in order for relaxation to occur. Without that, that's rigor mortis, right? Now, without that, if a person is alive, that is something called tetanus. Continued muscle contraction, not healthy, not good. So ATP normally comes from cellular respiration. The cells within the body, right, will, in particular, the mitochondria. Look over here at this model. Actually, we have a better model over there. So let's take a look at this model. And so in this class, I provided for you a PowerPoint for the cell, but I'm not testing you on the cell in particular. We bypassed the chapter for the cell, and we're just focusing on chapter 4 and through it, right? Because there's a lot to go through. So I just provided for you so that you have an idea. But look at this structure right here. You see these? They kind of look like little weird-looking worms, right? Those are called mitochondria. Mitochondria. So mitochondria produce ATP. Those of you online, I'm going to pull up an image of a cell and just point out there we go. So you all can see that these little structures right here are called mitochondria. Mitochondria produce ATP. Mitochondria produce ATP, and ATP is important to power many processes in the human body, and one of them is muscle contraction. You'll see here muscle cells may rely on glycolysis for ATP. That's wrong. Should be ATP. Fix that there. ATP. It's a process, and I'm not going to ask that you really, we're not in general bio here. We're in this human biology class. So just know that it's the way that the body can produce ATP, right? During strenuous exercise. This is important because the fact that as you're exercising, know that the amount of oxygen that's present can be diminished as a result of you exercising and maybe not taking in enough oxygen. Why do you breathe heavy, or why can you breathe heavy while you're working out and exercising? It's as a result of there's an oxygen deficit. You're needing more O2, you're needing more oxygen. So you'll see here that muscle fatigue results if cells need more ATP than is available, and that can be a problem, right? We've all experienced a point where, right? We've all experienced a point where we've been doing something, we've been exercising, we've been doing some type of physical activity, and it's come to the point where you're just exhausted, right? Have you worked more than 12 hours at any given time, right? Have you stayed up for more than just, like a regular day? Or have you stayed up really late into the day and into the night and into the early morning, and you're just like exhausted, right? I remember being in the service and being in boot camp in particular, and the whole thing of exercising and just continually exercising and not having a whole lot of relaxation, and you just feel exhausted. Right? This is as a result of your body is producing so much ATP, but over a period of time, your body is then going to, through the processes of muscle contractions, that's just going to use up what ATP is available, and you feel exhausted, fatigued. Sure, go for it. Yeah. So what's going on is that you do have the ability to recuperate and recover, right? That's a real thing. right? So a matter of like giving yourself a little bit of time to recuperate. How about taking in some food stuffs that can also enable to contribute to your body to recuperate, drinking some water, resting for a bit. Those will all can contribute, but there can be a time where it doesn't just feel recuperate after a few minutes. Have you ever worked out really hard to the point where like you're done, you take a shower and you're just like, I don't really feel like doing anything. I'm just like done, right? And then you just know that, man, you just really depleted what goes on as far as your reserves and your ability to do. How about this? Think about this for a moment. We all right now, as we're sitting here right now, we have ATP, we have energy reserves present within our muscles. Right? And it's also, there's something called glycogen. Right? Glycogen is important for the whole processes regarding breakdown and production of ATP. And we have glycogen reserves present. So our liver and our skeletal muscle will hold on to this glycogen. Have you ever heard of glucose? We've all heard of glucose, right? So glucose is one of the fuels that the body needs. Well, how do we store excess glucose? Well, one way is that via glycogen. Now, can we also have issues where we can store, if we take in too much food intake, we can store fat cells and such, adipose tissue? We get that. You don't understand also that if you're starving and you're not taking any food, we can break down the fat that's present within our bodies in order to provide that nutrition and such. But know that you all just sitting here right now, if you were required to do something very quickly, say there was an event that occurred, God forbid, say maybe there was a fire or there was some type of explosion that took place. At a moment's notice, right, all of us that are healthy and well pretty much, right, you'd be able to start to run like that. Why is that? Because you have these energy reserves present within your body. That's pretty cool. You also have something, right, that's called adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, that are in the adrenal glands. They're just sitting on top of your kidneys, and they will kick out this chemical that kind of supercharges you. So that's also a pretty cool thing, all right? So ATP, glycogen, I'm not, folks, look at this image right here. We're gonna go to this next image. For you all in this class, you are not by any stretch of the imagination going to have to memorize this image here. But I want you to see it, that it's important for you to know that short term, your body can function and processes can occur without much oxygen intake, right? You can produce ATP with no oxygen present for a short period of time, but really having oxygen present for your body to produce these cellular respiration, know that you'll produce more ATP in the presence of, right? So you'll see here this aerobic respiration. So I don't want you to have to know this or memorize this, but just I'm showing it to you, again, as non-science majors, realizing that there are processes that go on in the human body, whether they're in the presence of oxygen or not, that will still produce ATP, which is needed for the processes of the body. So know this. There's a process called diffusion. Diffusion, imagine I had a cologne bottle here, a perfume bottle, and I sprayed it, okay? I sprayed it right here. As time went on, or with my fan here, it would blow the cologne or the perfume out to the rest of the room. It would be concentrated highly here where I just sprayed it, but as it diffused out into the room, it would, over time, you'd smell it. Without the fan, it would just naturally diffuse throughout the room, okay? There was no energy required. So the fan analogy, don't think about that, sorry. There's no energy required for that diffusion to occur. But know this, that if I had to do the opposite effect, energy would be required. And if I needed energy to be required to do a process, the opposite of like diffusion, going against a concentration gradient, I would need ATP, I would need energy. And so this ATP is very important for the function of the human body and the many processes that go on. They're called active processes. Active processes, reactions, they need ATP. So ATP is important for muscle contraction. It's important for active processes in the human body. So know that ATP is a very important for the body to produce. And the mitochondria of the cells are where these reactions occur. Little areas of the cell. Now, you'll see here that muscles may contract weakly or strongly, depending upon the number of muscle fibers that receive the signal. We understand this. You may not, we get this because here, look at this. I'm lifting up this phone, this cell phone, right? That requires a certain amount of muscles to be able to do that. It's pretty light though, right? How about this marker? That's even lighter. So there are fewer muscle fibers needed in order to lift this marker. But how about the water bottle? It's a little bit heavier. So more muscle fibers are needed to lift that. Do you understand? So depending upon the number of muscle fibers that receive the signal, in order to say, hey, gotta lift something heavier or lighter, there's going to be more of a strong or weak contraction. Now, how about in the case of something where it's heavy and it's so heavy that you cannot lift it? Yeah. I mean, folks, have you ever, worked out with any type of resistance training and such? Absolutely. You'll come to a point where you'll be like, or how about this? Say you lift a certain amount of weight and you're able to work out with it, but it gets to the point where you're fatiguing and you just can't lift it any longer. All right. So those are kind of scenarios where it's whether it's too heavy and you just can't lift it, or it's not too heavy, but you're getting fatigued. And so over time, yeah, this weight you've been lifting in the past, but can't lift it. You can't do another repetition, another rep. Right. That's a very real thing. Okay. And so really it's a matter of the number of muscle fibers that are being stimulated. The more muscle fibers, the more your ability to be able to contract. Go ahead. Well, you can, because yeah, like your body gets to the point where you're like, okay, I'm at my limit, so to speak, with what's going on with the musculature. Sure. So a twitch, have you ever had some type of issue where you have maybe like an infection or something, or you're getting a cold or a flu and your eye will twitch? It'll just do like a little, just very quickly, right? Or one of the muscles in your arms or your leg will get a little quick twitch. Yeah, absolutely. That's just a very, not all muscles are firing, not all the fibers are firing. It's just a little bit, and it's just a very quick muscle contraction. That's a twitch. Tetanus, sustained contraction 3 to 4 times the force of a muscle twitch. So this is really, when you're thinking of tetanus, and when we think of really as a result of a bacterial toxin, then we can end up having sustained contraction, and this can be a bad thing. This can be a dangerous thing. All right, let's see here. So we have, this is just showing you as far as the muscle nerve, muscle junction, that neuromuscular junction, and just showing you muscle fibers and such that are being innervated by the nervous system. Okay, that's just showing you as far as, and you're not having, I'm not going to really require you to have an understanding of just past the point of looking at this and saying, and just seeing that, yeah. So a twitch is very quick as far as a contraction. Tetanic contractions are, or tetany is when we have a sustained contraction that goes beyond just contracting to do a job or some type of activity. It's sustained, it's contracting, and it's not a healthy or a good thing. Look at this next image here, and you'll see I've talked about these, the isotonic and the isometric contraction. Okay, and you don't even need to have a weight in order to have, because folks, I told you, right? So everybody do this for me, please. Bend your arm, tighten your bicep without moving your arm. Just tighten it, right? That's a contraction. That's an isometric contraction. Isotonic, again, there's movement that's taking place. The insertion is moving closer to the origin. Remember those terms, please, origin and insertion. All right, muscle fatigue. Muscle fatigue is very real. And again, it's just a matter of that. So oxygen is important in order to produce ATP. ATP is important for muscle contraction to occur. So oxygen debt contributes to muscle fatigue. Now, there are some people that are amazing in that they are able to not really produce. Let's see here. How can I? Trying to think of how I can give you in such a way that they can exercise for long periods of time and not get fatigued. Have you ever heard of ultra marathoners? Ultra marathoners. So these are not people that run a 20-mile race and that's it. They'll run in one day maybe 100 miles, like something ridiculous, folks, as you and I would think and go, how is that humanly possible? It is possible. Now, they're not running real hard for 100 miles, but they're still able to do a slow pace and go for more than even just a marathon. So those are ultra marathoners, and they're able to, via training and as well as just genetics, they don't fatigue like you and I would. Let's see here. So regular weightlifting and training promotes rapid recovery, and that's also a key issue. So proper training. Yeah, so training is very important, folks. And having training for whether it's a young person, a middle-aged person, or a geriatric, an older patient, everybody needs to do some type of resistance training. You remember that, recall that. So look at our skeleton back here. So look at our skeleton and remember that bone responds to stress. So the more stress I put upon bone makes it weaker. Now, the more stress I put upon bone makes it what? Stronger. So it actually increases the density of the bone. So when you're working out with weights, resistance type training, it doesn't have to be weights, it can be just some type of resistance like machines and such. Are you just only strengthening your muscles, or are you also strengthening your skeletal system, your bones? You are. You're absolutely strengthening your bones. And so having our older patients do light resistance type training can help them and prevent, or at least help manage, osteoporosis, right? Bone density, where the bone density becomes thinner and it's not as strong as it possibly should be. And so patients that have osteopenia, osteoporosis, these are patients who are susceptible to fractures, and that's not healthy or good. Now, let's take a look and see as far as with some different injuries and such. So I said to you that a strain is an overstretching, tearing of muscles and tendons. Strain. A sprain is an overstretching and tearing of ligaments. So strain, sprain, we need to know the difference between the two. You'll see here that I put RICE. So RICE stands for, as far as treatment is concerned, rest, ice, compression, elevation. When you have some type of musculoskeletal injury, right, RICE is important. Rest, ice, compression, elevation. Now you'll see that skeletal muscle responds to training, responds to stress, and over time, it will increase in its ability to do to overcome a load, to be stronger. And so micro tears can occur. We don't increase the number of fibers of muscle cells, but we increase the size of the structures of those cells. So we as we develop and train and such, we're just increasing the size. So yeah, if you train muscles, they'll get bigger, right? They'll get stronger, they'll get bigger. If you don't train, on the opposite end of things, they'll atrophy, they'll become smaller, and they'll weaken, right? So if you don't use it, you'll lose it. Very true, right? As far as muscles are concerned. And major tears in muscles, skeletal muscle, can cause damage that will be replaced, that the skeletal muscle fibers will be replaced with scar tissue, which could end up having detrimental effects to the skeletal muscle. Have you ever seen someone have a bicipital tear, right, where their tendons will tear away from the bone, and it'll cause oh, it's terrible stuff. Thank God I've never experienced that, but I've seen it, and that's more of a tendinous type thing. But I've seen patients with issues with their chest muscles, their pectoralis major, where they've caused damage to that, or the hamstrings or quadriceps, and that can actually cause replacement of that skeletal muscle with scar tissue, and it can cause shortening and lack of function and strength in that area that's been damaged severely. So I've had patients with that have suffered from traumatic injuries at workplace, where they've lost body parts, as well as then that also not just causes for a body part to be lost, but also how about the damage to the soft tissue, the musculature, ligaments, and tendons in the surrounding area? Absolutely. So that can absolutely have scar tissue formation and really diminish the ability for function of that soft tissue in the muscles. The next one here, next slide. Cramping, spasming, tics. So the tics, let me start with those first. So sometimes people can have neurological conditions that can cause different tics that can occur, where there can be a little bit of like a contracture, or like a, how about like a closure of the eye, like a blinking, or like continual blinking, or one side of the face can kind of tighten up a little bit. These are involuntary. The person is not doing it on purpose. Have you ever heard? Now, we'll talk about that more in nervous system. Also can be exacerbated, triggered by anxiety, those that experience this. We've all had, I'm sure, a muscle spasm, right? How about in the room? Muscle spasm, right? You've had a point where your back or your leg or your shoulders or whatever, one area of your body is just really tight as a result of working out, training, doing whatever you do. And that's uncomfortable. Yeah, that's no fun. How about cramps? Cramping can be as a result of a potassium deficiency. Remember I told you that like bananas have, or one aspect of a nutrition, a food that you can have a potassium from? Having a deficiency of potassium can lead to these cramps. So have you ever laid in bed at night or watching TV on a couch, and all of a sudden you get like a tightening of a muscle? In particular, like the legs are more, the lower extremity is more prone to this. That can happen. Or if you've had an older person in your home, people maybe like even in like, yes, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, so like a Charlie horse, that involuntary contracture of the muscles for maybe it might be just a minute or two, right? Or a couple minutes, that can really hurt. That's a cramp. How about a disease process called muscular dystrophy? This is a disease process that actually destroys muscle. It destroys muscle. So you'll see here that it's actually causing muscle to weaken and atrophy, and this is really bad. So muscular dystrophy. So the one that most people think of is this Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It's young people, and really with this type of disorder, we see that patients usually don't live past their 30s, and they usually end up, as they get older, they deteriorate and they need to be in a wheelchair. So muscular dystrophy is really a terrible type of illness and genetic type disorder. I said to you before, hey, we can have bacterial type infections. So an antibiotic, if you take an antibiotic, that will be able to treat a bacterial infection. Do antibiotics treat viral infections? They do not. But bacterial infections, they do. So strep infection, staph infection, right? Those are just examples of something you've heard of. Those are treated with antibiotics. So bacterial infections interfere with nervous system signals to the muscles. So in the case of tetanus, botulinum toxin, in the case of taking Botox, in order to put this toxin in small doses into certain facial muscles to create a sense of like trick to erase the wrinkles. That's what they do. Okay, but they can also have Botox can also be used for people who have contracture of musculature, say like in the cervical region in their neck, to the point where they're having torticollis. They're having their head kind of turned to one side. Have you ever seen someone like this? They have a head, maybe it's going to one side, or kind of like rotated and turned to one side. This is called torticollis, and this is also another type of issue where Botox can be used in order to calm down that muscle contraction. Sadly, another type of issue, which is relatively uncommon, is cancer of the musculature, the skeletal musculature. 1% of new cancer cases each year, cancer of the muscles, and that can be a sad and terrible type illness, and many times it can affect young people. Here you see, as far as this is showing you, and this is an actual painting that's a very famous painting that was done of a person who was in the military who suffered from tetanus. Right? You've heard like, get your tetanus booster, your tetanus shot. It's really important. If you cut yourself, you should make sure that your booster shot is up to date, and we want to prevent this tetanus from taking place. It's a toxin that can go and it can cause sustained muscle contraction to the point where this poor gentleman, you can see that his toes are curled, the tetanus contracture, his whole body, it's just extremely sad. So this is something, how about if we were to have tetanus and tetany of musculature that allows you to breathe? This can lead to death. So very bad. So they're showing you also someone getting a booster shot. And here, I think a couple more slides and we're done for the day. So you'll see here as far as the focus of on health, so making the most of muscles. So doing training, exercise, aerobic type exercise with resistance, really important in order to help maintain a healthy functioning human body, without a doubt. And you'll see here as far as, yep, there's 2 more slides to go. Here you're seeing in the next slide the different systems that are important that work with musculature. So you've got the cardiac muscle, right, the heart, working to move the blood, smooth muscle, working with the digestive tract, working to move food from your oral cavity all the way out of your body over time. Skeletal muscle, when it contracts, it produces heat. We get that. So that contributes to the body temperature, which is a good thing. And you'll see here as far as just producing movement, very important. And the last slide for today. You're just seeing here some terms that are available and you should review. Okay, folks, so I'm going to take a moment now and just focus on and discuss I'm stopping sharing for a moment, folks, just so that I can pull up for you all in coursework. So folks in the classroom, give me just a moment to just finish up here with the online class. So you'll see here in coursework, and I'm going to change the view to students. So I'll talk to you folks in just a moment here in the classroom. So you'll see here that student. All right. So lab muscular system. So folks, what you're going to do, you'll click on that. It's in Unit 1. And you'll see that there are images that are in documents and resources. You will need to identify these and label them accordingly. Oh, I didn't do the head and neck for the class. I'll have to do that. All right, folks, so that's what you'll have to do, and you'll upload that assignment, and that'll be due a week from today. And again, your quiz number 2 for chapter 5 will be available after 5 o'clock today.